In case you've been living under a rock or you just haven't paid attention to the patch notes recently, in the upcoming patch coming next week, Scylla will see a buff. Now this buff is supposed to buff her problems in early game, as after the purple pot was removed from early game, she seems to struggle a bit in middle lane and she didn't see much competitive play, she didn't really get picked a lot in ranked and she didn't perform as Hyrus wanted her to. How does this buff look? On one hand, she gets increased mana costs on her crush. Well, the mana cost goes up by 10 on every rank basically, starting from 70 instead of 60 and ending on 90 instead of 80. Not a major big deal there, especially when you consider that once her crush used to cost 110 mana at the highest rank. So this is obviously going to affect the early game a little tiny bit because it costs a little bit more mana and MP5 gets a little bit more value in that regard. Additionally, the damage of the ability on later ranks is increased. Instead of ending on 310 damage, Scylla's crush now ends on 330 damage, so 20 base damage more. The original damage is the same though, it's still a 90 damage on the first rank and then an additional 5 per rank. This is actually, looking back, not the first buff that Crush has received. Originally, the maximum damage was 290 and the base damage was still 90 back then, so in the end what has changed is the base damage you gain per rank and nothing else really. Is this something that affects early game? To a lesser extent, to be honest. It still does something for early, but what it really does something for is late, where you get some extra base damage, as the original starting value has always been 90 damage. On top of that, the magical power scaling is increased from previously 80% scaling to 100% scaling. And this is the part where you really gotta question the decision of this. Instead of opting for something that in some way increases her early game damage, this actually increases her mid to late game damage more than anything. And that's a little awkward when you consider what the buff was supposed to achieve. If you really wanted to buff Scylla's early game, then you could have simply increased the base damage of Crush on early ranks. Started with 110 damage and then let it scale up a little less. And you would be perfectly fine for a little better early game and no change at all to late game. But we took this route and we'll have to deal with it. And what does this imply? In order to be a little more clear about this, just look at the clear that I have on Scylla at this very moment of the video. Here you can see I deal a decent amount of damage to the minions already, but they survive with a little bit of health. I need like 1 to 2 basics around level 5. So around level 5, even after the buff, I will probably not clear the minions with the same items. Now I have Dynasty Playtime, which is not the best item here, and I could actually back here to buy boots. But you will see now on level 6 with the next rank on Crush that I get really close to killing the minions. Not in this particular case, but the one after, if I recall correctly, as there I have the damage that would be necessary to kill them if I already had that buff. So that's why I think this point is very crucial, because what this really does, it is helps with your clear around level 6, level 7-ish, where now you're not clearing that fast already, but then you will. This is not a major change, but it helps her. What it helps a lot more though is fights against players. Now if you just crunch a little bit of the numbers here, you can see that if we had Soulstone, Dynasty Playtime and Pen Boots, would have a total of 170 power. That would translate into 34 power more, or 34 damage more when it comes to the scaling of Crush. Additionally, you would get 20 flat damage with the new rank of Crush. In the end, you would have 54 more damage on a Crush around level 10 with 3 items on Scylla. And that's nothing that you should undervalue in my opinion. 54 damage is half a rank of Scylla's ultimate basically. And you know how much harder Scylla's ultimate can hit when you rank it up. In the same sense, 54 more damage is roughly the extra damage you get per rank of Scylla's crush itself. You get 60 base damage. Now, depending on which items you build, obviously that is the playtime is not the highest damage item here. If you got Doom Orb, you got a lot more damage, stuff like that. The damage differs a little bit, but it's roughly around a rank of the ability that you're using that you get an extra damage. That should not be undervalued. People make it out like, oh, it's just a little bit more damage, but that is actually a pretty drastic amount, especially around mid-game, because Scylla is supposed to be a late-game god, right? And with this, she becomes a lot more mid-game centered and has huge damage output there already, as opposed to before, where a lot of that was moved into late. This is also not the first time that Scylla's scalings were touched, because in a previous patch we saw a buff to the scalings on her 1. She has, over time, within this season, already seen a scaling increase of 35%, including the buff that's coming in the upcoming patch. I don't know if that's an amount that's really necessary, and I want to go even further here, instead of just talking about all the stuff that we have on Scylla on her own, and we compare her to another god. And there's one very obvious god that you can easily compare Scylla to. We usually don't have gods that are so similar in kits, but in this case it actually works very well. And that's Raijin. Now Raijin kinda replaced Scylla in the meta, as he is also a very bursty, very high damage god with a very good escape. It's slightly better than Scylla's, obviously, because he also has the option to get a free Aegis out of it and stuff like that. But in the end, they're very, very similar when it comes to their kits. They're there for bursting and not utility or anything like that. They've got a little bit of lockdown, but they have mostly high damage. As such, we just compare the numbers right here. On Scylla, if you compare the total numbers, also keep in mind that the 3 actually has no damage at all. She has a total base damage of 1,390. At the same time, she has scalings of 295, and per ranking of her abilities, she gets 210 extra damage. These values sound decent enough. Let's put them in perspective when we compare them to Raijin. Now Raijin has a total base damage of 1,720, which is significantly higher, roughly 300 more damage. He also has a lot more scaling, 430, which is roughly 130 more, 135 to be exact. And he gets 235 base damage per rank, so an additional 25 over Scylla. Now, what we have to keep in mind when looking at these characters is that this is assuming that Raijin hits absolutely everything. I would say that is not all that likely. I would assume that usually you're going to hit most of your abilities on him, but you're going to miss a little bit. If we assume that we miss a single hit of the one of the first 2, so it's just a single proc, and a single strike of the ultimate, one of the 4, which is, I think, very, very reasonable. And his damage already drops. Then he's at 1,375 damage. Base damage, that is. He still has 350 scaling, which is 55 more than Scylla has. And his base damage per rank is at 190, so 20 less than Scylla. So, depending on how much you hit, they are kind of close in damage, and you would probably think that the numbers are reasonable when compared to a character like Raijin, who in my opinion is still very, very strong. Now what you have to keep in mind is the moment that Scylla ults and kills someone, she gets an ult reset and she has the option to deal a lot more damage. Raijin can theoretically hit multiple towers with ult as well and get some extra scaling, but realistically it's not gonna be like him hitting a whole team with all 4 shots. If Scylla manages to hit another target after killing someone with the ult, her numbers spike ridiculously high. She then has 2,190 base damage, 415% scaling, nearly as much as Raijin when he hits absolutely everything, and 310 base damage per rank increase. So that little bit of a difference there, that tiny spike in damage that you would get from one extra ult, theoretically, makes so much of a difference that the numbers just go completely in Scylla's favor. Just there's just no reason to even look into that any further, as the numbers are clearly favoring Scylla the moment you kill 2 people with the ultimate. And you can go on after that. You can obviously kill 3, 4, 5 people. We cannot assume that this happens. This is a rare occurrence. But if we can assume that Raijin hits absolutely everything, then we can also assume that Scylla kills a single target with her ultimate, in my opinion. So while the numbers at first seemed like they were kind of fair, you know, a little lower than Raijin's, whatever, just overall kind of, I would not say necessarily balanced, but maybe even kind of a little bit too low. The moment the ult connects once, her numbers just go completely crazy. And with that, I just want to put that as an example why I think that the buff that she's getting is way too much. Now, I have obviously not only done this in theory, I've not only crunched these numbers, I've also done this in a practical application. We have played quite a lot of PTS games, so we could test out Camazos over the past few days, and we had quite a lot of people picking Scylla just to try her out in those games. And as far as I recall, there was not a single game where Scylla was underperforming. I'm not quite sure if she was overperforming in every single game. She may have just had a decent performance in 1 or 2 of them, but she was never really underperforming. She did really, really well, and she had absolutely no problems from mid-game on, whereas everyone was pretty much surprised by the damage she dealt, which is very reasonable in my opinion, as you have an extra rank on the ability for free pretty much. As such, with the numbers and the practical background to this, I rest my case. I think the Scylla buff is way overdone. It is the wrong approach because it's not the early base damage numbers that it affected, but rather the late game or mid game. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think Scylla needs that kind of buff, and it's absolutely unfun to play against. I know that quite a few people will see that differently, and especially some Scylla mains will probably think that is a nice buff, but I've even heard from some Scylla players that they thought this buff was way too much and should not make it into the game like that. With that, thank you guys for watching. Hope to see you all tomorrow. Sloth, out.